That's not good. The chances of further interest rate cuts in 2025 have just dropped. And that also means that Bitcoin will have a harder time rising in 2025. As many have assumed, the Kobeissi Letter even writes that the interest rate turnaround is now dead. And we know that Bitcoin has a very high correlation here. Regarding the liquidity in the market, and if the interest rates aren't low enough here, when liquidity is lacking, Bitcoin really struggles with its price here. We shouldn't over-dramatize the whole thing, but you have to keep a close eye on what's going on here. Right now, it only looks like an interest rate cut in 2025. What's going on here? At the moment, it only looks like an interest rate cut will take place in 2025. And there's even a 43% chance that we won't have any interest rate cuts at all by mid-year. That's really crazy, because many recently were still expecting an absolute liquidity cycle. We also have some highly explosive revelations from Anthony Scaramucci, who's now talking about it, that Donald Trump actually has no clue about Bitcoin. He doesn't understand what it's all about. That's also pretty scary. But there is also a very, very positive twist, because Eric Trump, the son of Donald Trump, is apparently here. The Bitcoin maximalist in the family. That makes a lot of sense, because his speeches have always been much more authentic. Like this, what Donald Trump is telling us. So we have an insider revelation from someone who has known Donald Trump personally for many, many years, and also his family. For many, many years, he has known him personally, and also his family. The blog trainer says here, which starts at 2:30 p.m., the reported U.S. job market data came in better than expected, since inflation worries are currently dominating. A strong job market is bad for the capital markets and for Bitcoin. Right now, only one interest rate cut is priced in for this year. We also see that the Bitcoin price initially took a dip. Now he's actually bounced back relatively well. So the market isn't pricing it in as negatively. Right now, we even saw a pattern today, that it's really never been like this before. We've seen 14 green hourly candles in a row here. The last time something like this happened was 8 years ago. So it's not that it's never happened before, but the last time something like this happened was 8 years ago. This definitely shows that there's still buying pressure here. But in the long run, we really need to keep an eye on liquidity. When liquidity goes down, Bitcoin really struggles here. Very difficult. In the Kobeissi Letter, which always covers the traditional financial markets, it even says the Fed pivot is officially dead. So that refers to the interest rate shift, that now the rates are going to be dramatically lowered again. The stock market is crashing. After almost 1 million jobs were created in the US in December, unemployment dropped to 4.1% right after the Fed announced a weakening of the job market. More jobs were created than expected. Unemployment dropped to 4.1% right after the Fed announced a weakening of the job market. And that's basically it. What worries many investors here is that the current job market data doesn't indicate any interest rate cuts. And we'll get into that later, how the interest rate expectations are right now. And that's always the biggest metric to pay attention to. Also here, for the Bitcoin price, there are even people who say that the halving cycles are irrelevant. You just have to look at the M2 money supply, and the M2 money supply always correlates strongly sooner or later, very closely tied to the Bitcoin price. And that's why the Bitcoin price is most dependent. Here, the M2 money supply and the cycles, they wouldn't be that relevant. I mean, I find the theory exaggerated. The cycles do have a certain relevance. So the Bitcoin having cycles, but there are really representatives who say that the Bitcoin having cycles don't mean anything at all. The Bitcoin price, it drops and falls along with the M2 money supply. You can see it here too, that the S&P 500, so the stock market, initially crashed after the release of the data. And you really have to understand that, because that sounds good at first. Here, the job market data is actually strong. The economy is strong, better than expected. But you always have to know that with interest rates or money liquidity, there's basically always the opposite effect. That means you have a strong economy, a robust economy, low unemployment numbers, high employment, everything is really going great. Then there's no need to stimulate here. But then you can look more closely, that you can rein in inflation. Then you might even consider raising interest rates. And that's why capital markets always celebrate it. When the economy is bad, because when the economy is bad, interest rates are lowered. And what happens? When interest rates are lowered, then all assets rise, meaning gold, Bitcoin, silver, real estate, and so on. And that's actually the twisted part that a lot of people in the stock market, but of course also with Bitcoin, actually celebrate it. When the economy isn't doing so well. Because then, in the short term, things are good for the assets. Of course, in the long run, it can lead to bubbles again. When interest rates are too low, that can lead to crash situations and stuff like that. But in the short term, it assesses it. The stock market, but also the Bitcoin market, is usually more positive. If the labor market data and the robustness of the economy aren't looking so good, and it's actually more like it's in free fall here. Here in the Kobeissi Letter, they actually come to a conclusion. The Fed's pivot is over. So that now there might not be any interest rate cuts at all, or really just minimal cuts. The baseline scenario now shows a 44% chance that there won't be any interest rate cuts until June 2025. Months ago, the markets were expecting 5 or more interest rate cuts in 2025. Since the interest rate cuts are already priced in, the yield on 10-year bonds is approaching the 5% mark. Don't underestimate the importance of this fact. So, it's likely that we'll see an interest rate cut in 2025 based on the current situation. Unless, of course, some shocks come along. Wars, I don't know, unexpected things. Then, of course, you can also make emergency interest rate cuts. That means you really have to keep a close eye on it now. What's actually really interesting to watch right now is that the long term, meaning the 10-year US Treasury bonds, keep rising. Even today, this morning, or for you all, it was around noon when the labor market data was released. That the long term, meaning the 10-year US Treasury bonds, keep rising all the time. Also today, this morning, or for you all, it was around noon when the labor market data was released. The 10-year US Treasury bond has risen by another 10 basis points here. And that's really very, very crazy. Because Jerome Powell said at the last Fed meeting that this will be a temporary phenomenon. And indeed, since the interest rate pivot, meaning the first 50 basis point cut, in 2024, we see that the yields on the 10-year Treasury bonds have risen by 120 basis points. So that's really concerning. We see that the yields on the 10-year Treasury bonds have risen by 120 basis points. So that's really concerning. Here, or let's say it's really, really interesting to watch. That means, on one hand, interest rates are going down. Okay, now you're kind of stagnating, but we've already seen the interest rate cuts. On the other hand, at the long end, interest rates are going up. We have falling interest rates at the short end and rising interest rates at the long end. That means the interest rate spread is getting wider, and you can only really get a handle on it if the demand for US Treasury bonds keeps rising. When you make the US dollar attractive again, if Donald Trump were to release his Bitcoin dollar or something like that, then you could get something like that under control again. Or if they engage in QE here, that definitely gives some hope. If the 10-year Treasury bonds really get completely out of control, that then means the Fed has to step in with quantitative easing or something like that. So they have to buy their own government bonds here, so that the interest rate spread doesn't get too wide. You actually want to keep the short and long government debts relatively close together. And as mentioned before, you can change the short end through interest rate manipulations by simply being proactive in adjusting the interest rates up and down. But the long end has more and more market forces that need to be taken into account. Now, pay attention, this is a bit concerning, but that shouldn't bother us here. I say it would ruin the party. I'm still long-term, bullish. On Bitcoin, you just have to keep a close eye on this. What's going on here? That could also be the case. We've seen that happen a lot in the past, that some scenarios might happen here. And then we'll quickly see a pivot here again. And then all of a sudden, it starts up again. Here with the money printing, sooner or later, they're going to have to print money anyway. So sooner or later, there are going to be some shock events. And then they'll start up with the money printing again or something like that. They might even be waiting for it. But according to the economic data, you just can't rely on it right now. For example, to massively open the floodgates of money. And then we have a highly explosive release here. This is from Anthony Scaramucci, who was here in an interview. About Donald Trump, Eric Trump is speaking, and how he feels about Bitcoin because he's known the Trump family for years. Seems to have insider information here. Listen to what he has to say here.
And he is not, in my opinion, knowing that the family hasn't been the Bitcoiner in this family for 3 centuries. And the Bitcoiner in this family is not the Bitcoiner, as the real ghost woman, the totally orange-pilled person. Trump is painted orange, but Eric Trump is orange on the inside. He is a complete. This ISM has to say, it's comfortable if you are at night, have a clinic, that's why you cause of coin, but he'll is say. He says, and I got a chance to see a speech in Abu Dhabi at the Bitcoin conference, and she's the opportunity long turned out of turned. So this is really interesting because, as already mentioned,
Scaramucci seems to have known the Trump family for a very, very long time. And he says here, Donald Trump is painted orange. That means he's not orange at heart, he's not a Bitcoiner at heart, but he's just playing along with the show here, or I don't know, maybe he's being influenced by his advisory team. Maybe he sees the chance to use Bitcoin as a campaign tool. But he makes it very clear, hey, even if Donald Trump is just painted orange, if he actually has no clue about Bitcoin or is just parroting something, here he says, yes, we're not selling the Bitcoin and we're doing. The USA wants to become the crypto capital, the Bitcoin capital, and mine all the remaining Bitcoin here in the US. Those are also statements, for sure, where you really have to ask yourself, are you even checking Bitcoin because you can't mine the remaining Bitcoin here? Everyone in the US mines. That would put the whole concept of Bitcoin, let's say, into question. Plus, it's probably just not feasible energy-wise, because let's say it's a decentralized system and basically the miners always go where the cheapest energy is. Where the cheapest energy is. But he definitely says, hey, folks, Eric Trump really gets it. He says here, Eric Trump isn't just painted orange. Eric Trump is truly a Bitcoiner at heart. He even talks about how Eric Trump is a Bitcoin maximalist. Check it out this time. That means he's all about Bitcoin, no shitcoins, no altcoins. Donald Trump just released some NFT card stuff or something like that again. He always seems to release some random altcoin stuff, I don't know, whatever. Then he released his own coin or his, I don't even remember what it's called. His weird altcoin DeFi project or something like that he released. And he makes it clear you have to differentiate. Eric Trump is really the one who gets it in the long run, who sees the big vision, who really sees it. Bitcoin is the change, the thing that can take our world to a new level, that can elevate our consciousness to a new level. And you could really see that in his speech at the men's conference. While Donald Trump is still talking about Bitcoin prices of 150,000, Eric Trump is here talking about Bitcoin prices of $1 million. And Scaramucci recently mentioned that too. When he talks about US dollars, Eric Trump is here discussing Bitcoin prices of $1 million. And Scaramucci, he recently released something too, that Donald Trump is apparently the Bitcoin price at 150,000. Wants to pump the US dollar. But Eric Trump clearly talked about a Bitcoin price of $1 million at the conference. And Eric Trump really sees the big vision here. That's probably why. Donald Trump is very, very strongly influenced here. If you keep listening to the interview, Scaramucci also touches on that. One, that the team around Donald Trump is really strong here. With the new finance minister, the SEC chief, right? Here. Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk, and all the Bitcoin supporters, Howard Lutnick. And who else is out there? The new crypto Caesar, who is building the crypto team for Donald Trump. And these are really, really exciting movements. And that's ultimately the positive part. That means we do have an interest rate environment, which of course isn't that great right now. But it's also not an absolute emergency right now, or something like that. But on the other hand, we have the movement where Eric Trump is involved. And I mean, if Eric Trump really has an influence on Donald Trump, and he will definitely do that. He'll definitely bring him back every now and then. I mean, everyone does that in some way. Drop a comment about how you handle things like that with your parents or whatever. If they're buying some shitcoins or just leaving their money sitting in a savings account or something, then you'll probably go up to them and say, hey, yo, dad, mom, check out Bitcoin here. No shitcoins here, no savings accounts, no weird DeFi projects, but Bitcoin is actually the solution. And then there's a really, really interesting effect here that we see here. That wasn't the case with Trump. The hardcore Bitcoiner is, well, that's pretty shocking at first. But the environment is really well set up here. And the environment is influencing Donald Trump again. And that could lead to rising Bitcoin prices again. And if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll drop a link for you down below. 21 Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. Here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Absolutely recommend it. See you later. Catch you later. Peace out.